But yes, I have caught up with UFC Moscow now, and it was semi-worth catching up on.
Yep, some of it was okay.
Yep.
And you've had plenty of time to look over that agenda. I definitely made sure to send you, I trust.
Oh, yes, we're going to be breaking down... Is Blachowicz versus Jacare really next week?
It is, yes.
Oh, it is.
Uh-huh.
Why can't they just give us a fucking break?
I know, right? Well, we have one coming up right after this. There's 2 weeks without a UFC card until...
Overeem versus Rosenstrike.
Aren't we excited to come back to that? But then we have 245 right after that, which is insane. It's got 3 title fights anyway.
Yeah, no, that does rule.
So
it's pretty good.
We should.
Oh no, it's really depressing though.
Yeah, why is that? Because of.
Well, it's got Marias Aldo and Jan Faber.
Well, that's not depressing. Hello, my beloveds, and welcome to another edition of Heavy Hands. Yes, we're back. It's me. It's Phil McKenzie. Still, despite all of your wishes, all of the voodoo dolls you've pricked and poked, alive and kicking and talking about fights. Phil? What's up? I've started this one with a weird energy. I'm going to try to maintain it. How's it going?
Not too bad. I think maybe you have absorbed the weird energy of the UFC Moscow card, which was a fight card, which was... You couldn't call it that bad, but you could definitely not call it good.
Yep. Just don't call it sweetheart. All right.
it was just workmanlike and kind of there. And now we're moving forward to the mind-blowing excitement that is Jan Blachowicz against another aging middleweight.
Well, don't undersell it, Phil. It happened. It's gone. We have this card coming up this weekend. It will happen. It will be gone. And then we're going to have 2 weeks off. And I got to be honest, like, you came in when we first started this call today. You echoed my thoughts exactly, which were, why, oh why, did we just have this giant pay-per-view with Masvidal versus Diaz and all of these incredible fights, and now we've had 2 other weekends where, like, just nothing memorable has really happened. And why can't we just get a weekend off? You know, let it sink in. Let us savor the memories you're trying to cram down our fucking throats. And so with that in mind, I just want to say, like, I'm looking forward. I think we're going to try to be covering some interesting topics, getting away from the UFC schedule. And I keep saying this, but really maybe we should try to do that more even when the schedule is churning along underneath us. But this week is just another Heavy Hands episode, I suppose. We're smack dab in the middle of 2 cards. We're going to try to preview whatever we find interesting from next week. As Phil said, the main event, Jan Blachowicz versus Jacare Souza. Despite underselling it a bit, I think pretty interesting matchup, to be honest. I doubt it'll be uninteresting to watch. We've also got something that will be surely tragic to watch, almost no matter what happens. Shogun Rua is fighting Paul Craig in the co-main event. And Phil, you and I were looking at the Shogun Rua resume, and we're being agog at how good it looks. That he's still, like, knocking out all of these high-level fighters. There's remarkably few losses, considering the fact that he is 37 and has looked 97 since about 10 years ago. Charles Oliveira is fighting Jared Gordon because Nick Lentz was busy this weekend, I guess. There's some other stuff on here that's pretty good. James Krause finally making his return after what I thought was a sensational welterweight debut back in August 2018. He's fighting Sergio Moraes, seems set to hand Moraes his 3rd outstriking loss in a row. So yeah, we're going to hit whatever we find interesting, focusing on the main event. Then we're going to look back to last weekend's card, which did at least give us the very interesting Zabit Magomedsharipov versus Calvin Kattar in the main event. It was the most compelling one going in. I think it was the most compelling one having come out of it, and we're going to talk about it later. Okay. Light heavyweights. Jan Blachowicz. Jan of Rivia is back once again, having just hilariously destroyed Luke Rockhold. He now will try his hand again at stopping an old, past it 185er from getting a foothold in the light heavyweight division. That man being Jacare Souza. And I don't want to spoil anything, but there are definite echoes in Jan Blachowicz' game of many of the things that Jack Hermanson did successfully to Jacare Souza. So how prescient is that, do you think?
I mean, I think if you look back over Jacare's recent resume, it's not that encouraging. I mean, not specifically in the people he's won and lost to, although there is that to it, but also in the ways that he kind of did it. I think there's been a suspicion that Jacare was just being aged out of contention for quite some time, and that he would, line up a title shot for one reason or another, and then he would either get injured or someone would have to step in, and eventually he just started getting derailed by losses. And I think the Hermanson fight is definitely the one where you just find yourself thinking, yeah, the physical game that Souza was able to impress in the past is simply not there anymore. Right. He really is a crafty old man by this point.
On a physical level, and I say this meaning absolutely no disrespect to Jack Hermanson, he is the worst guy that Jacare has lost to. He's the least athletic of all of these little red boxes on Jacare's Wikipedia page.
And, we mentioned this at the time, but you could see the absolutely stark disparity between when Hermanson fought Souza and when Hermanson fought Cannonier. Mm-hmm. You're like, oh, that's a crossover middleweight, light heavyweight athlete in the prime of his career.
Mm-hmm.
That's what that looks like when Hermanson simply bounced off him.
Yes.
So yeah, that is slightly worrying, because I think if we've seen anything from the successful middleweight to light heavyweight crossovers, it's been the ones that are still basically in their athletic prime. And the ones which haven't been have just tried to out-physical the other guy and just gotten instantly fucked up.
Which is kind of hilarious, right? Because all the guys who are still in their primes, like by virtue of the way middleweight works, like you just have to be sorted out over like a decade through a series of brutal body-destroying wars to become a top 10 fighter. So all the good ones who've moved up, all the good middleweights, are way too old now for light heavyweight. They're still contending at 185, but they can't succeed moving up because the division has destroyed them. They had to make that sacrifice to gain their ranking. And all of the bad ones who were very bad middleweights or mediocre are now very competent at 205. I don't know. The irony.
Yeah, Thiago getting himself vaporized in seconds, how much did that contribute to his success at light heavyweight? We will never know.
Right.
He'd gone on to have these tough back and forth fights. Maybe he too would have had gone along the same path. Instead, he would just get completely annihilated back when he lost at 185.
Mm-hmm. If Thiago Santos had beaten David Branch, he would be like a decrepit old man still cutting to 185 right now. But he would be top 5.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's the story. How about Jan Blachowicz? I mean, how does he compare to a Jack Hermanson then? Right? If we're looking at like what I was trying to allude to before, this is probably pretty obvious already, but Hermanson really troubled Souza with his jab. Jacare is not a bad defensive fighter, so to speak. He certainly has head movement in his arsenal. He can parry punches. Very importantly, he's a consistent counter puncher. So even when you do succeed in hitting him, you're likely to start getting hit back. But he fights with kind of a relaxed guard and comes forward a lot, and you can hit guys like that with jabs. He's a big, muscly Shane Burgos. The jab is always the target for fighters who want you to commit to something so they can do a big defensive move and a big counter. You just poke them over and over. Blachowicz has, I don't think it should be shocking to say, a better jab than Jack Hermanson. Better and more consistent. It really is like the cornerstone of his game. He's probably a comparable counterpuncher as well, which Hermanson needed at times to stave the pressure of Jacare. My concern is, how does his wrestling compare to Jack Hermanson's? I mean, we saw how Hermanson's offensive wrestling completely withered against Jared Cannonier, but his defensive wrestling, his scrambling, these were really essential to getting a win over Jacare. Even an old Jacare, is still can be terrifying to be taken down and have him on top of you. So, I don't know. We've seen some grappling out of Jan Blachowicz. We've seen him taking top position against guys like Nikita Krylov. I don't really know what that means for Jacare Souza.
Are you saying that Nikita Krylov is a worse grappler than
I would never suggest
Jacare Souza?
I would never suggest such a thing. After all, he only had to get Von Flood once before it didn't happen the next time. So.
I mean, wrestling defense has been somewhat of a consistent problem for Blachowicz. Is that, the Gustafsson fight, but it hasn't been like Patrick Cummins is, of course, the most damning example.
It was true a while ago, but they're also, like the last two good takedown artists he's fought. So
yeah, when was Corey Anderson? It was a while ago, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm. That was before. That was in 2015.
Yeah.
Gustafsson and Cummins were back-to-back 2016, 2017.
Okay. So, I mean, I think we have seen improvements from that in that regard from Devin Clark, from Jan Blachowicz. So, like, Devin Clark, I think, he's not I wouldn't class him as a good wrestler, but he is at least a willing wrestler.
Mm-hmm.
And we saw Blachowicz turning him away without too much effort from the takedowns, converting his own offense, and I think probably the most important thing, not muscling his takedown defense so that he got incredibly tired.
Yes.
Late into the fight.
Took Jan Blachowicz a long time to learn the Derek Lewis Zen mentality, but now that he has it, he's a lot harder to tire out.
I think that's generally been one of the issues which has made him, so vulnerable to wrestling, is that it becomes a cascade for him in his losses, in that he's.
Oh, hold on, we're having severe choppiness. Let's let the internet reconstitute itself for a second. You there?
Yep.
Okay, you're back.
Yeah, your sound started to break up as well. Right.
Please go on. You were saying, it's the cascading effect. I think you're absolutely right. Like, this is something we've seen with other fighters in the past. Like, I think Matt Brown had this problem early in his career. Like, his famous gas tank was not as reliable. He also had a problem where he used to jump into submissions. And Matt Brown, I remember him talking about, like, just becoming more competent and more confident in his ability to address problems on the ground. He just didn't, like, go crazy when he was there. He felt he had specific tactical solutions. It does seem like Blachowicz has reached that point where he's confident enough with his grappling that he can go to it offensively. And what that often indicates, I think, is that he's no longer going to be freaking out so much on defense that he's going to be dead after a round of it.
Yeah, and he's got some pretty nice submissions like that.
Mm-hmm.
Was it Bulldog choke that he got Devin Clark with?
He's got
a solid guillotine. He's pretty good from top position.
He got what might be called, it was like that arm triangle off the side of the back against Krylov. We might call that like a no-gi Ezekiel choke. He's got weird submissions, certainly.
Yeah. And, Weird actually worked pretty well against Jacare last time out.
Uh-huh. Who almost got Schultz headlock guillotined, yeah.
So the other thing is that, so from Jacare's perspective, one of the things which is concerning is that he's a tremendously inefficient fighter. And this might be, we've lauded him for being smart and tough before, because he is. But he's someone who tends to spend a lot to get to to get to his desired outcome.
For sure.
So he does so by exchanging with people, as you mentioned. He can draw people into counterpunching exchanges simply by getting hit, and he will just walk people down and have some fairly rote head movement, which might get him hit and might not. But then he'll just come back with one of 2 or 3 strikes, and they might hit. But even if they don't, he's still going to be there to throw again. Mm-hmm. But it's also true with his wrestling, in that he has a tendency just to throw himself at the opponent. Like, he does not set his shots up very well. He basically just dives on people and then tries to get a hold of them and then smash them back into the fence.
And there have been a number of Jacare fights recently that have been marked by him going really hard for the takedown right from the jump and then never revisiting that tactic at any point later in the fight, which to me is pretty clear evidence that, like, he just does not have the stamina to force a prolonged grappling battle on anyone anymore. Unless that first takedown is immediately successful, it just doesn't seem like he has the energy to maintain it.
Yeah, and I think so. What we can expect from a light heavyweight fight is that he's going to have the stamina to go for more takedowns, but I don't think he's going to have the physical strength to be able to hit them as consistently. I mean, he's, like I said, so much of his takedowns are fed by him just muscling them.
Mm-hmm. And we can presume better stamina at 205, but for me, honestly, like, there are other factors that are influencing Jacare's gas tank from where I'm sitting. He's 39 years old. In fact, he's very close to turning 40. December 7th, says Wikipedia. So he's nearly 40 years old. He's still a pretty heavily muscled dude. And as you said, he's inefficient with everything. When he throws, it's a power punch. Even when he slips, when he defends himself, it's a dynamic movement. His takedowns are fully committed. He's an older man playing a, like, slightly retooled version, but a retooled version of what is still definitely a young man's game. And we have to note, this is a 5-round fight. Now, part of me becomes very nervous thinking about trusting Jan Blachowicz to outlast his opponent, but I think we really have seen strong evidence that he can do that lately. In some really back and forth difficult fights too. So I don't know. I'm not really confident personally that moving up to 205 will have solved Jacare's gas tank problems. I'm still kind of feeling like we'll see one pretty energetic round, and then especially depending on how much grappling he allows himself to try and how successful he is with it, a pretty steep drop off after that.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think, we've seen there's definitely some, the one thing that Jacare has going for him is that he is a good counterpuncher. Mm-hmm. And we have seen Blachowicz against Santos, for example, getting, if Blachowicz decides to go for his rushes on Souza rather than, trying to keep him at the end of his jab, then I can definitely see that Souza could, pick up either a, left hook or one of those little chopping right hands that he likes so much. But the thing about that particular scenario, it was only really enabled because Santos was playing an outfighting game.
Right. He made Blachowicz come at him. And I don't know, maybe Jacare can do that, but if he does, he's also more likely to be eating a lot of attritional damage.
Yeah, I would be shocked, frankly.
Like, he can counterpunch off the back foot. He's done it, but like, he is going to be eating lots and lots of jabs and little snapping kicks the whole time. So I don't want to say it because, like, I've seen Jan Blachowicz get out grappled so soundly by several people in the past. And there's this definite feeling that, like, he just hasn't been facing anyone like this. Granted, he shut out Luke Rockhold pretty damn solidly in the clinches. A Luke Rockhold who came in, like, super bulked up, clearly with the game plan in mind that he was going to try to use his old grappling game up at this new division. But I don't know. That strikes me as a pretty good sign for Blachowicz, and I feel like I don't really see a good reason not to pick him.
Yeah, I mean, Rockhold has always been incredibly powerful in the clinch. I mean, it's the big, and it's notable that, one of Rockhold's big things was his big breakout was when he basically just out-muscled and out-physicaled Jacare for the Strikeforce belt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he did.
And Jacare just couldn't get him down. And I think, these two have been on... I think at the time, Luke Rockhold was the young guy, and Jacare was, if not the old guy, then the guy who was, had just reached his physical prime.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe these two haven't deteriorated at the same rates, but I think that the deterioration for both of them has definitely been there.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I don't really see how Souza does it unless he lands the counterpunch of his life, or unless, like, for whatever reason, he's been cutting shitloads of weight and he looks infinitely faster. Because the one thing that really, I think one of the things that really determines whether you're going to be effective up at a new weight class is, I mean, particularly if you want to pressure, it's foot speed. And he is remarkably plodding even for a middleweight.
That is very, very true. Yeah, I don't know. It just feels like,
but it's either foot speed or range, and he's neither long nor fast.
Yeah, nor does he fight long. He doesn't make the most of his reach. He's a boy. I really hate to say this, Jacare. I'm so sorry, but you're a hooker. and I'm sorry. There's just no other way to say that. That's it. So, yeah, it really feels like however many rounds it takes of Jacare plodding after. I mean, again, I think when given the sort of slow-paced pressure that Jacare tends to apply, Blachowicz is more than capable of just sticking to his jab and moving, every once in a while stealing a big counterpunch or whatever. But I think it's a lot less likely that he'll make a dumb mistake and walk into something. And when he doesn't do that, he's otherwise like an extremely competent and reliable outfighter. So,
yeah. So I mean, I think it could conceivably just look a lot like the early going of the Weidman fight.
Of Jacare's fight with Weidman? Yeah.
Yeah, just without the turnaround.
Yep. But hey, if Jacare, I mean, here's the thing about Jacare. He's been getting tired lately. He's been burning himself out. It has not stopped him fighting at a very similar pace.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he's extremely hard. He's a tough motherfucker and super experienced, and does not start to doubt whether he can make it to the final bell or whatever at any point, no matter how exhausted he is. So who knows? I still love Jacare, man, and I still enjoy watching him fight. He's really, really crafty, but I just think that craftiness may have been very specifically tailored to the kind of fights he was getting against the other top middleweights. I mean, it's notable that 3 or 4 of all of his last fights have been pretty brutal wars. And I just think the Hermanson fight is enough for me to think that Blachowicz is just not forgiving. Doesn't seem prone to give Jacare the chance to have that kind of fight. But who knows? Again, I don't want to undersell Jacare's toughness or his ability to just eat punches and continually come forward.
Yeah. And, it's worth noting, Blachowicz has range and a jab, but he's not defensively incredible.
No, not at all.
If Jacare just starts quickly and throws counters in combination to the jab, there is a chance he can hurt Blachowicz. But there's the other problem, that Blachowicz has been incredibly tough.
He's super tough.
He's been knocked out once, and he's one of those guys where he's gotten tired out in the past, but it's it's a kind of discouraged getting tired out rather than a when you're looking at this guy and you're thinking, oh, he just can't hack it physically. So he's got the one punch knockout to Thiago, but other than that, he's been like very hard to put away.
And yeah, but your point, it's a good point about the defense, something to keep in mind, right? Like, Blachowicz, his defensive game is all eyes. It's all like leaning really precariously out of the way of shots, swiping it at punches with your chin totally unprotected. It's why he's particularly vulnerable when he's throwing, as we saw against Santos, because, when neither his guard nor his brain are focused on defense, you can just completely put him away with one shot. But if Jacare were to come in here and do the things that were really successful against Hermanson, I'm thinking specifically left hook to the body, right hand to the head, like Blachowicz is going to be relying on his ability to see those counters coming. So combinations for Jacare. If he comes forward, pressure, combinations, every time he throws two and goes body head. I think he could make it. He could definitely make it the kind of war that he had in his previous few. So, I don't know. Fascinating fight. Very much looking forward to seeing it. That's definitely all the time that we can stand to spend talking about it. Let's take a break. When we come back, oh god, Shogun Rua versus Paul Craig is the co-main event. There's some other things happening as well. Although, let's be honest, does any of it really matter? Now that I've confronted the grim reality that Shogun Rua is still out here, anyway, we'll talk about it after this.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
Hello. Welcome back to Heavy Hands. We are continuing through this card. Nice little 20-minute break there to discuss what we're reading lately. Phil, of course, reading through his vast and ever-growing collection of early 18th century smut magazines. And I'm over here reading other people's criticisms of Rogue One, so that the next time Phil brings it up on Twitter, I can have lots of ammunition to throw back at him. But setting that aside, we're now going to talk about the rest of these fights. Let's see. Oh, God. I had literally forgotten until I looked back at the Wikipedia page what was up next. But it is, of course, Shogun Rua versus Paul Craig. I mean, Shogun should win this, right?
Yes.
He should really win this. Like, it's not that complicated to break down. He's probably going to knock Paul Craig the fuck out.
Yes.
All right. I mean, I think what's sad to me about it is that will just be, like, he won't be done, Shogun Rua is never going to reach a point where it's like, oh, I can't do this anymore. And so he's just going to keep doing it. So each Shogun Rua fight I see, each new matchup, is really the promise of 1,000 future matchups, each bleaker and more depressing than the last. But this one, I guess, if Shogun's going to fight, I guess he should win. Yeah, I mean, like, how much about this matchup is there to say? Shogun Rua remains a very competent power puncher. In fact, he's, I think, a better counter and combination puncher than he was at previous points in his career. He's also much, much slower than he ever used to be. But Paul Craig is, like, really bad at striking and not a very good wrestler. So,
yeah, so that's the one thing to mention about, like, the old decaying guys. We've mentioned it before. They tend to get worse at the things they were good at and better at the things they were bad at until they are just a formless, like, all veterans eventually kind of corrode into being the same guy.
Mm-hmm.
And the things you kind of end up with are a reasonable amount of old man grappling strength and baseline takedown defense.
Mm-hmm.
And that is one thing that is like notably better with Shogun Hua than it was with like even young athletic Shogun Hua, because young athletic Shogun Hua would just give up the takedown to anyone.
Yeah, there were
and
no
would then just try and
consequences.
half guard sweep his, or leg lock his way out of it.
Right. We get the famed Shogun knee bar game.
Yeah.
But he's definitely not easy to take down these days. We just see like a more experienced. Like you said, it's a very similar transformation through which Jacare Souza has gone. Like he's got
or Little Nog.
Yeah, or Little Nog, or all of them. But in no way has he weakened in the ways that Paul Craig seems poised to take advantage of. So,
yeah, I mean, basically the Shogun's purpose is to be part of a larger tapestry at the moment, which is the greater meta-narrative of proving that light heavyweight is absolute trash. Because he's going to be... Wait a minute, what's his record going to be? If he wins this, he will be 5-1 in his last 6 fights.
with some of those wins coming over, like one was over Corey Anderson, weird as it may have been, and potentially very arguably undeserved. And then Tyson Pedro was like supposed to be a prospect, so like they're not even all wins over just washed up old fighters. But then, of course, to remind us, there is that incredibly quick and one-sided loss to Anthony Smith stuck in the middle there. So, fuck this division. It's so dumb. I mean, there's nothing more to say on this fight, is there? Do you have anything more to say?
Nope.
Okay. Shogun Hua is going to knock Paul Craig out. That's that. Honestly, and again, it would be kinder if Paul Craig were to win, but he won't. It's light heavyweight, and Shogun is just going to keep on going until he is a puddle. Okay, what else? We're going to basically be organizing the rest of this episode in the form of a good old-fashioned fight smorgasbord. So we're going to try and just kind of run formlessly through and just have a couple words here and there on the fights that interest us before giving UFC Moscow much the same treatment in review. So next up, Charles Oliveira versus Jared Gordon. Phil, I shamelessly stole your joke at the start of the episode, but this is essentially Nick Lentz was busy, and they really wanted to do that fight again.
Yeah, they wanted Oliveira Lentz 4, and this is the closest thing they can do to it. They can get to it.
Yeah,
and Charles Oliveira is going to win this probably pretty easily.
Yeah, that does seem the way. I mean, I'll say this: Jared Gordon, much higher output than Nick Lentz. At least I believe so. Let me double check that with the stats. But I definitely think one of the advantages for Oliveira at least in the last fight with Nick Lentz was that Lentz has to manage his output in order to conserve energy. I think this is actually less of a problem for Lentz now that he's moved up, but against Oliveira at 145, certainly, he had to be, I think, very cautious of expending too much energy and was tired basically after the first round. That was kind of a pattern of Nick Lentz's career as a featherweight. Jared Gordon doesn't have that. You know, he threw 116 significant strikes in that fight with Joaquim Silva, which was a barn burner. He threw 194, 228 total. And I'm pretty confident he can maintain a pace for 3 rounds. So does that change, in your mind, what is otherwise like a matchup we have definitely seen 3 times before?
No, it doesn't change it. Like Oliveira has, I think he probably still can be broken, but I just don't think it's by fighters like Jared Gordon. And that's no disrespect to Jared Gordon, who is amazingly tough and incredibly game. But Oliveira has him so vastly outgunned everywhere Oliveira's become a better striker. He's become more composed. He hits way harder, and he's one of the nastiest submission grapplers in the sport, and a pretty good wrestler.
He's a very good wrestler. I think Charles Oliveira is weird mental issues are seriously the things that have held him back for a long time. That and a murderous weight cut to 145. But he is a remarkably well-rounded and very dangerous fighter. He's very Tony Ferguson-esque.
Yeah, I mean, he's nasty in the clinch. He's, as we said, he's an accurate straight puncher. He's got really hard kicks. I don't see how Jared Gordon wins this or even doesn't get finished.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think Oliveira's problem has always just been a lack of defensive mindset everywhere. And now he's I'm not 100% sure if he's shored that up, but he's made up for it by becoming even more offensively potent in a greater variety of areas. So yeah, Oliveira with the striking, guillotining Jared Gordon when he's forced to go to a takedown. We've seen it before. Okay, this one I'm actually really interested in. James Krause is fighting Sergio Moraes on the featured preliminary bout, the top of the ESPN Plus prelims here. Now, I don't say it's super interesting to me because I don't know how the fight's going to play out, which is usually the case when I'm very compelled. For me, the lead of this fight is I want to see James Krause at welterweight again. In his last fight, he fought Warley Alves. That was back in August of 2018, 2 days before my birthday last year. And he, wow, no belated happy birthday, Phil? You weren't even gonna, I mean, what the fuck? He had a sensational performance. I had been pretty doubtful of how well James Krause would do at welterweight. He'd had one fight at that class before against Tom Galicchio and didn't look particularly great. But he came in against Warley Alves and just picked him apart. It was a very Max Holloway kind of approach. He kept a lot of just hand traffic in Alves' face, took full advantage of his reach, often pawing and poking and touching and tapping with both hands. In ways that were, treading a bit of a fine line, getting his feet in weird positions, squaring up. But he looked, and it was notable because he was standing across from a great athlete in Warley Alves, he looked much sharper and quicker. It looked like the change that I'm always hoping to see when someone finally moves up to a larger weight class. He looked like he was aware of every position that was threatening him. His head movement was very unorthodox, bending over at the waist, quite risky, but he was seeing shots coming and dealing with them individually and controlling the entirety of the fight with his reach, with his pressure. And the knee that he finished Warley Alves with, or at least the one that began the finish, is one of my favorite knockouts I've seen in recent memory. He, beautiful setup, using the threat of those long arms, getting Alves to duck, timing a knee perfectly as he does. I just thought it was a sensational fight from James Krause. And that's a guy whose career has been marked by great potential and not always the sensational fights that you think he's capable of delivering. And that was it. And so all of this is leading me to say that Sergio Moraes has lost to two patient, long-armed, outfighting types in his last two. A Warley Alves who seemed to have absorbed James Krause's penchant for that style of fight. And then before that, Rocco's Martin Life. And both of them completely dominated Sergio Moraes. So I'm interested, but to me it feels like a very predictable fight.
Yeah, I think so. The two things to note are that those wins were informed by a slightly different approach to the one that Krause took, in that they kicked Sergio Moraes in the leg a lot, because he tends to just come forward and brace for the big loopy overhand right. But I don't see a reason why Krause can't just accomplish something fairly similar by just jabbing Moraes up a whole bunch. And the other thing which is notable is that The other fight that James Krause had up at this weight class was when he was in the that tough fight, which isn't on his official record, which was the Jesse Taylor fight. And that was what had me really concerned when he was going to fight Wally Alves.
Right.
In that he just got kind of ragdolled. And he did a good job of stopping Alves from setting up takedowns on him, and as you mentioned, even countering them at the end. But that is always in the back of my mind that if someone that Krause was not a physical lightweight and is not going to be a physical welterweight either. Mm-hmm. If someone actually gets their hands on him, I don't trust him to be able to stay upright that much. But then again, Sergio Moraes is not the world's most willing takedown artist or good control grappler.
Yeah, I mean, the problem for Sergio in these last two fights is like, I don't know. His whole approach was, there is nothing like little and incremental about the game that Sergio Moraes plays on the feet. And I think most troubling, like I may be misremembering here, but he didn't even really like go for many takedowns against Rocco Martin or Wally Alves. He's kind of just content to keep walking after them. Maybe he knows, he's not a great takedown artist and just doesn't want to like recklessly bridge that distance. But I just don't know how competent he is at getting takedowns if he is stuck on the end of someone's reach. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that he's like a markedly better clinch wrestler at least than Wally Alves. And James Krause dealt with Alves in that range really well. He basically just like, controlled his grips and stayed relatively patient and chipped away until he got an opening to slip free. And I see no reason why he can't do something similar to Sergio Moraes. I don't see Moraes as being like more physical than Wally Alves.
Nah.
So it feels like
I mean, they're just things to keep an eye out for. I don't expect him to win this fight. I mean, his fight IQ is, he's definitely one of those guys who just wants to do what he wants to do. Mm-hmm. Like, I mean, those takedowns he got on Rocco Martin were quote-unquote round-stealing takedowns, the ones you get in the last 30 seconds, which would be fine if he hadn't been getting dominated for the rest of those rounds.
Right, yeah.
James Krause by decision.
Yeah, because there were 3 takedowns against Tony Martin, but they were of that variety, where it's like, what strategic sense do these really make in the fight that you are currently losing every other moment of? So, James Krause, it is, as you said. Let's cover one more from here. Okay, 2 more. We're just going to touch on 2 more, because I think one that we both found particularly interesting is Wally Alves versus Randy Brown. But I would be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that Francisco Trinaldo and Bobby Green are fighting here. You have a read on this one?
I think you mentioned there's a solid chance this is boring.
That's my I hope it ain't true, but that's my fear.
And I kind of co-sign on that. I tend to favor Trinaldo on this one, just because I don't really trust Bobby Green to track people down at all.
Right. And if it's boring, right, that's my thing, is if it's boring, I'm less confident in Bobby Green's ability to win it. I think Bobby Green surprises people when they force him into an exciting fight. And, Trinaldo has those counter-punching tendencies. That's the reasoning, basically. I think if he comes in cautious, Bobby Green is apt to be very cautious in return. But Trinaldo's the harder hitter, more aggressive, generally speaking. And, I don't know. Bobby Green tends to go adrift in slower fights.
Yeah, I mean, because basically what he wants is a mid-range fencing boxing match with the other guy, mm-hmm. where he can kind of roll and pick off shots with his elbows and, grimace and posture and kind of draw them into his kind of physical and mental fight. Mm-hmm. And if he doesn't get that, he does tend to just follow people around. Mm-hmm. I mean, reference like the Barboza fight. Barboza just had him following the whole time and just had him walking onto not just kicks, but punch combinations. Mm-hmm. And Trinaldo can definitely kind of replicate that, albeit whereas Barboza did it with kind of speed and volume as Green came after him. Trinaldo will do it with even more movement, but more commitment on his single punches. So I suspect that we have like Trinaldo backs off, body kick, Bobby Green like gesticulates at him to show him that it didn't hurt. Everyone realizes that it did. Bobby Green walks after him for a bit, keeps following him and taunting, eats one big power hand, and so on and so forth.
Rinse and repeat.
Yeah. And that's kind of it. Like, I think we just get a kind of the Edson Barboza fight, but with the power dialed up and the pace dialed down.
Yep. That sounds spot on to me. The Edson Barboza parallel between Francisco Trinaldo, not one I'd ever thought of before, but it is lighting up parts of my brain to think about it. I think that is actually a very valid comparison. Okay, so why don't you lead us into Warlley Alves versus Randy Brown then? Are both of us? I mean, we're both favoring Trinaldo in a pretty slow fight. I think that sounds about right.
Mm-hmm.
But this one was pretty perplexing
Alves
to both of us.
Oh, sorry, I think we had some sound issues there for a sec. So, Alves Brown. This is a fight where both of these guys have been baited somewhat, in that they've
Please don't
had
make
a lot
that
of
a verb. I don't. They've both been baited.
So they've both had like a reasonable amount of expectation put on them as being hot prospects, and they've both gone past the event horizon of disappointing losses, which it's possible to have.
Mm-hmm.
And once you've gone from there, you're in a black hole of you'll never be good again.
Except as with Ryan Bader, it is secretly a black hole of quietly getting better.
Yeah, it's just that no one will ever care.
Right.
Everyone will just be like, remember when you looked dumb against this guy?
You'll spend 30 eons in the hyperbolic time chamber of everyone forgetting about you after your losses, and you'll get so much better. You'll come out to prove it, and then Daniel Cormier will laugh at you and I don't know, tell you your nipples look funny or something, and you'll just have to crawl back into your hole in shame.
Yeah, Randy Brown will eventually win the welterweight belt, and then like the first thing they ask him will just be like, what the hell happened in that knockout loss to Nico Price then, eh? How'd you get knocked out there?
Joe Rogan comes in. You remember when Nico Price propped your chin on his instep? That was crazy. He'll never be able to live it down. Yes, please go on.
So both these guys have basically reached that point, and surprisingly had really good outings in their last performances.
Yeah.
Alves had a controlled, game plan focused approach against Sergio Moraes.
You compared it to Khalil Rountree's win over Eric Anders. God,
how can you not remember Eric Anders?
I almost said Eric Andre, and then I kept trying to think of the right name, and Eric Andre.
Yes, I think Khalil Rountree would beat Eric Andre.
The shit out of Eric Andre. But yes, you compared it to Khalil Rountree's performance. The big, strong athlete goes in there and realizes, "Ooh, I'm super quick and powerful. I should just not go insane and pick this guy apart with low kicks."
Yep. And Randy Brown had perhaps the most impressive performance anyone has ever had against Brian Barberena, who has fought a lot of very good fighters, where he just absolutely schooled him.
Mm-hmm. Statistically speaking, the most one-sided loss Barberena has ever had, with the only exception being maybe the Colby Covington fight. But doubled.
The Colby Covington fight, was a control win, and this was a breakdown into a knockout.
He completely doubled him in landed strikes and then knocked him out in the third. I mean, he outstruck him way better than Vicente Luque did, to say the least.
Yeah. And so the question is that, the fascinating thing about this fight is that both of these guys showed, evolution in their last fight. And both of them seem like they are very capable of capitalizing on the other person's historical area of not being very good. Mm-hmm. Randy Brown has historically had particularly poor takedown defense, which has been kind of not a great thing to have in the welterweight division.
Right.
And has gotten himself into some weird problems on the ground. So he's been, he got dominated by both Bilal Remember the Name Muhammad, and by the evil fighter from Team Evil, Michael Graves. That really didn't narrow it down much, did it? And, Wally Alves
the one who's not Gilbert Burns from Team Evil.
Yeah. And Wally Alves is not an amazing takedown artist, but he's a decent one, and he's very dangerous from top position.
Mm-hmm.
And conversely, Alves is not that far removed from that performance where he got chewed the fuck up by James Krause's jab.
Right. A rangier, pressuring opponent just completely picked him to pieces.
And that was kind of what Randy Brown's last fight just looked like, which was him working behind a long jab, 1-2, and just never letting Brian Barberena get anything going.
Mm-hmm. So, and then all of this sits on a bed of a messy bed of inconsistency. That's the thing that's only really been alluded to. But the tricky thing with both of these guys is that despite what are arguably for both of them career best performances in their most recent fights, I don't trust either of them at all. Like, I don't know what that means for will the progress continue going forward. That's the troubling thing about it for me.
I mean, because they both came immediately after, if not career worst performances, then career what the fuck performances against Nico Price.
Yeah.
I mean, so yeah, both of these guys, you do not know what you're going to get. What we've seen recently suggests that it's actually going to be pretty good. That this is a surprisingly relevant, skillful, and developed fight for who these guys are.
Mm-hmm.
But who the fuck knows? And yeah, I mean, I do favor Randy Brown. It seems like he can replicate that Krause game plan pretty much to a T.
Mm-hmm.
With the added benefit that he hits way harder than James Krause.
Yep. He's much faster. I think he's got greater reach. And yeah, we saw we saw the speed and power come through in that Barberena fight, no doubt. And I would favor him too on the basis that, Alves can certainly hit a nice shot. I'm less confident in his ability to do that while being pressured. I think the rangy pressure that Randy Brown showed in the Barberena fight is going to be really key to bringing out the untrustworthy side of Worley Alves. Alves has the potential to just hit a takedown of Randy Brown and fuck everything up. But if Randy Brown does what he did in that last fight, starts quick, makes his length a factor right from the start, and keeps the pressure on Worley Alves, I think that is going to cause Alves's improvements to start unraveling pretty quickly. Because the thing for him is, for Randy Brown, I feel like that was so far and away the best performance of his career. I don't think I had seen anything like it. Not only in terms of who he managed to beat in a very good fighter in Brian Barberena, but it was just an incredibly consistent 3 rounds straight, great showing. I have seen Worley Alves dial it back before, right? After his fight with Alan Jouban, I remember he came in against Nordine Taleb and looked much calmer. And because the problem in the Jouban fight was that he went nuts early trying to kill Jouban and exhausted himself and then ended up in a war, which he, I believe, should have lost. And then he fought Nordine Taleb, and it was a way more measured, controlled performance. And I didn't put it together at the time that was only because Nordine Taleb was not Alan Jouban. That Nordine Taleb was content to have a much slower paced fight with him and allow him time to think and set up his shots. And then wouldn't you know it, by the time Alves has a fight with Brian Barberena and Kamaru Usman, he loses both of those in very similar fashion. He doesn't look good under pressure. He starts to unravel. He starts to waste energy and become very inefficient. And then the fight is completely lost to him. I think that tendency is still there, and it's more likely that Brown brings that out early than it is that Alves takes Brown down and finishes him in round 1. So,
yeah, and it's worth noting, that Nico Price loss on Brown's record is weird.
Like all of
But he was
Price's,
winning that
yes.
fight really easily, and he just got Nico priced.
Like
and,
many of Price's
I think
fights.
we can now recognize that can happen to almost anyone.
Yes.
If someone gets Nico priced or Yair Rodriguez, we shouldn't necessarily hold it against them.
No, it doesn't mean that Tim Means is a bad striker because Nico Price lost 4 minutes of lopsided striking exchanges and then knocked him out. Like, that is the Nico Price superpower, is to be pretty bad at everything and then randomly knock people out. So yeah, I have a little more faith in Randy Brown. I just think by the virtue of the fact that the fight starts on the feet and he started that Barberena fight very quickly, I think he is going to grab a hold of some very useful momentum from the start. And I've never known Warlley Alves to be any kind of comeback fighter. You know, the fight's either tough and then he's burning energy and maybe sometimes he wins, or it's easy and he can control himself and then he can dominate. But I have never known him to have a difficult start and come back. So, Randy Brown.
Yeah, bit of a Claudia Gadelha.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, you mentioned the reaches, so look that up, and Warlley Alves 72, James Krause 73, Randy Brown 78.
Uh-huh. So
considerably longer reach than either of those guys.
Yep. Oh, and there's also the fact that I know Alves can hit a shot, but I think he tends to get a lot of his takedowns from clinch positions, and Randy Brown is actually very good in the clinch. So he's a very stout clinch fighter. So lots of reasons I think to favor Randy Brown, but again, with all of this is going on the resting on the notion that either of these guys is going to continue to deliver what they delivered in their last fight. So who knows? And who knows? Maybe Warlley Alves will come in and be like, I'm the leg kick guy now, and screw up all of Randy Brown's pressure with a lot of leg kicks. Could be.
Yeah, I think he's going to have to be gritty with it.
Uh-huh.
Because Randy, Barberena tried that a bunch, and he had to be very close to get it done, because otherwise Randy Brown was just scooting out of range again.
Mm-hmm.
That he's going to have to, or he was getting punched in the face. So
Right.
I think unless Alves has really learned how to, throw combinations into low kicks, which we haven't seen from him.
Right.
I think, or he's just become, he's just somehow learned Jacare levels of grit. I think that's going to be tough.
Yeah, I think it was much more, in terms of both these guys' most recent fights, Alves' fight with Sergio Moraes, for the reasons that we had sort of laid out in the Moraes versus Krause breakdown, much more a case of him just being in a really forgiving style matchup. Where like the baseline, like Roundtree Anders, where like the baseline level of striking skills and discipline are enough that the other guy is never going to be able to solve that or come up with a new way to try and attack you. Whereas Randy Brown, like, Brian Barberena is good, and he tends to seize on small mistakes that people make and wiggle his way back into the fight as a result of that, and Randy Brown stayed well ahead the whole fight long. So, a much stronger performance if I had to compare them. And reason enough to pick him. And that is, boy and howdy, is that all the previewing we have time for. Let's take one more break. When we come back, we're going to get to recapping, talking about all the many delicious ways in which we were wrong. Oh, wait. We only previewed one of these fights, but we were wrong. Boy, were we wrong. Calvin Kattar did not beat Zabit Magomedsharipov. But at least Greg Hardy didn't beat Alexander Volkov. We're going to talk about that and more after this.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
All right, welcome back to Heavy Hands. We are looking back at UFC Moscow, and first things first, the main event. Both of us came in sort of narrowly favoring Calvin Kattar. I think Zabit Magomedsharipov made one good decision that totally threw away like everything I had sort of half expected out of this fight. I said at the top of the show that much of this fight felt like very reminiscent to me of, previous fights in both of these guys' careers. And I think like what it came down to is that Zabit realized to avoid the reach parity becoming a problem for him, he needed to pressure. He needed to keep that reach in Calvin Kattar's face and make him back out of range so that he could actually get a little time to take advantage of his kicking game. And once he did that, it was just like a slightly further away version of Kattar's fight with Shane Burgos to me. Like the difference being that because of the reach parity and coupled with, Shane Burgos brought lots of pressure, and so he ended up walking into lots of jabs. Zabit, the difference was that he was able to compete from a longer distance as he was pressing forward, and so Kattar didn't start off with an early lead, and then just like in the Burgos fight, the pressure mounted and built over the course of the second round. And then just like in the Burgos fight, he just like reached a point where he and his corner realized you just need to go forward and swing shots at this guy. You need to close the distance and be more aggressive. And it ended up being almost enough to win. It turns out that Zabit Magomedsharipov has a harder chin than Shane Burgos, another one of the small differences that defined this fight. But for Calvin Kattar, it didn't feel like anything we'd never seen from him before. It felt like a familiar pattern, and it was certainly a familiar pattern for Zabit. Like, you don't even have to dig deeper to try to make the comparison fit. He did lots of crazy dynamic shit. He won 2 rounds, and then he got super tired and sort of got his ass kicked in round 3. And we have now seen that pattern in almost exactly that form 3 times. 3 of Zabit's last 4 fights. So, I don't know. What do you think of all that?
Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I mean, I think, well, we can see why Zabit's management turned down a 5-rounder.
Yes.
That was extremely smart.
Uh-huh.
But also, it does leave you thinking, assuming, and this is, I mean, he's either, if he does fight for a title, and that's his next kind of, and then that's his next fight, if this was a title eliminator, he is going to have to either fight Max Holloway or a person who has beaten Max Holloway.
Yep.
And
someone in Alex Volkanovski who's also sort of known for being relentless.
Yeah, neither of those seem like they're good 5-round fights. So I think whatever we see, we have to see him in a hard, like, we have to see him in a 5-rounder, because he's neither showing like a hugely diverse array of finishing skills or like, and yeah, the ability to, even if he was, like, you have to be able to go deep.
Mm-hmm.
And he's just not really able to do it. What I think he did show in this fight was, I think what we were worried about was that Zabit's wrestling would be too much, that he would be able to play the kind of move away and pivot and draw Kattar into bracing,
mm-hmm.
and then either hit him with shots or low kicks or just step forward into the clinch. And we didn't really see that at all.
No.
Not until Kattar sold out on a perfectly valid flying knee in the 3rd round. I mean, if you're going to throw a flying knee, that's when you do it.
20 seconds left or 50 seconds left or whatever in the last round. Yeah, I can't fault him too much for that.
When the guy's been slipping the whole time.
Right.
And
you've been landing lots and lots of uppercuts by reading his head movement already.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get it.
Exactly. But yeah, I mean, I think that Zabit is, for as long as it lasts, he's a better striker than at least I gave him credit for being. And yeah, that was largely due to what you mentioned, is that he made an extremely smart choice to just keep his lead hand out there. And I think the thing is that the early rounds didn't have a lot of like hugely consequential offense from Zabit. It was mostly just point scoring stuff, although he did land some very nice like left hooks around the guard and body shots.
But he kept that jab in Cater's face, and Cater became just like too anxious about staying in his own punching range. And Zabit is, as we noted, the far more diverse striker. It's like he's got options if he's got you backing up. And whereas like Cater, while he landed some good kicks here and there, they're more like they're very much supplemental to his main game.
Yeah, I think one of the things that his corner said, I think it might have been Font who said it to him. He said to Cater, he said, "You can't throw too many jabs," and like that I think was very, very true, and I think it was something that Zabit had keyed in on right at the beginning of the fight. One of the things that, as Cater's like big third round kicked off, he just started coming in behind double non-committal pump lefts, double non-committal pump rights.
It's what Zabit was doing. Just double, triple up on the jab.
Yeah, he didn't have anything behind them, but they were there, and they were drawing defensive movements out of Zabit. And Zabit was obviously, a bit gassed by this point, but also he was just like, he was clearly struggling to read what the strikes were more, and he wasn't dictating. And yeah, so I think he did a great, like, it was a great, smart game plan from him. And I mean, unfortunately for him, like, it's becoming increasingly apparent he has this kind of high-flying athletic style that he's not able to sustain.
I don't even know if it's this style. I honestly think it has to be a weight cut thing. He's a big featherweight. He looks very drawn out. It has to be, because like, seemingly irrespective of how he chooses to fight, he's exhausted in the third round. Like, if you just survive 2 rounds and start pushing him into third, it's not even like Cater was making him work particularly hard in the fight up to this point. Like, that was my fear watching live for Cater, is I was like, coming in, I picked him thinking he could probably afford to lose the first 2 and might still get a finish, or a big 10-8 or something in the third. But he hasn't made Zabit work hard enough for that to happen. But it literally just took like 45 seconds of hard offense at the end of round 2. And then round 3, just come forward most of the time. And despite how easily Zabit had controlled much of the early portion of the fight and how little damage he'd taken, and how little how easily he'd been able to work, he was still gassed. So to me, like, it has to be a weight cut or something. It has to be something that he just can't help or get around.
I don't know. Like, I think it is like, these are just physical traits that some people have. I mean, the classic example is obviously Yair, right? I mean, Yair is probably, I wouldn't say he's any smaller than Zabit, and he's certainly worse technically. It just kind of doesn't matter. He's just going to fight in an even more extreme way, and he's just not going to get tired because he's just a freak.
Well, he did against Jeremy Stevens. I mean, he certainly can push it too far, going chasing a finish.
Yeah, that's true. If he completely blows his tank on someone that he thinks is dead.
Yeah, but Zabit doesn't have even
Zabit
that degree of
has a fairly clinical medium pace fight with someone for 2 rounds, and then looks like much worse in the third, and has done so repeatedly.
Maybe it's a mental thing, like, I don't know.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, and it should be said, like, this was also just like a really good fight. Like, it was just, we saw like a lot of nuance from both of these guys. It was much like the Burgos fight, it was a back and forth. These guys were not only, it wasn't just a contest of the lead hand. They were both attacking low kicks a lot. They were both attacking the body. Like, they were both attacking the other's defensive options. I mean, it was just a pleasure to watch.
Yeah, agreed. But Zabit is going to get fucking chewed up by Max Holloway if he gets that fight. I think we're both firmly agreed on that. Nightmarish matchup for someone with such a persistent third round cardio problem. So, good showing.
Yeah, or for example, he's probably going to have a number 1 contenders fight, I think is the thing. But almost all the people he could go up against, it seems like there would be significant issues there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think of the existent contenders, I would say his worst style matchup is probably Ortega.
Do you think that's a worse style matchup than Holloway?
No, of the existing contenders.
Oh,
like,
I see.
He's going to have to get through someone to get to Holloway.
Yes. Ortega, the guy who literally loses every round and then wins in the third. Yes, that's a bad matchup.
Yeah. And just a huge pressuring body puncher.
Mm-hmm. But there are not really easy ones. Like the stamina is a bedrock of any successful MMA game. Stamina, durability, these are like the things that you really should have. So like even like Frankie Edgar could be very difficult for Zabit because of his ability to go and keep going.
Although they train together and
of course,
going to bantamweight, so that one is fortunately one he's not going to have to encounter. Although it would be interesting and weird.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's the main event. What was our reasoning for picking Kattar? Like, basically just thought he was going to be able to put the pressure on. I don't know. I do think there's something to be said for, like, Kattar is really effective when he counters. He doesn't really seem all that comfortable doing it. Like, through the early going of this fight, it did seem like he was really fighting with himself, where every time he'd get pushed back by some non-committal shot, he was too focused on what might be coming after it, and not aware of the fact that if he had just thrown a right hand over, I'd say 60% of those jabs that Zabit was pushing him back with, he would have landed clean and hard with a counter as Zabit was piling in. So I don't know. There's something a hitch in Calvin Kattar's game. I think this is why it made me think of the Burgos fight, where I'm like, if just one more thing had gone wrong in that Burgos fight, Kattar wouldn't have gotten that knockout, and he was skating a very thin line. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I still like Kattar a lot. I mean, he is
of course
a unique boxer for MMA.
Mm-hmm.
I think in terms of just his ability to keep his balance, to like he does not strike like really anyone else. And I think we saw, a lot diversity of shot selection. Like I said, more low kicks from him. I think it was all good looks. It was just like, as he said, he ran out of time.
Yeah. All right. Well, what else? Volkov beat Greg Hardy. Hooray! He didn't want to. He didn't like extend himself beyond just comfortably beating a novice fighter. But as you pointed out earlier, Phil, it would have been really, really embarrassing to lose. So, and he did have a loss in his last fight, so I guess I get it. People are giving Greg Hardy like tons and tons of credit for making the same discovery that Derek Lewis did, which is like just stop doing so much, and you hit hard enough to hang around at heavyweight. I don't know. Do I have an endless amount of resentment for Greg Hardy and people like him? Yes. Am I loath to talk about him not only because he's a repellent human being, but also because he's not very good at fighting? Yes. But all those biases aside, it's like, just please stop reaching so hard to make this like an incredible moral victory for Greg Hardy or something, or like a show of how far he's come. He lost a one-sided fight against a veteran opponent who just very comfortably coasted to a win over him. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, I mean, he looks about as good as he could at this point in his career, which is not very good, and that's about it, really.
I mean, he's definitely gotten better. I'm not going to be a
bullshitter
and say that he's exactly the same as in his first UFC fight. It's just, it doesn't take much to get better than that.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it.
Yeah. Okay, well, what else?
So, like, just in general, like, for this card, one of the things which contributed to a slight general malaise around it was that the fights were all kind of slogs, or a lot of them were slogs.
Yeah.
And they weren't fights where people were just phoning it in. They were fights where everyone was trying super hard, and they were just nullifying each other a lot of the time. They were just grinds.
Yeah.
And Danny Roberts versus Zhelemie Imadaev was shaping up to be that. Roberts fought like a pretty risky, like really physical game plan. He was just trying to like clinch and take down and set a pace that Imadaev couldn't match, and it almost got him into bad trouble. But it managed to work out for him, and then he clocked Imadaev with a wonderful hook.
A beautiful knockout. And a perfect stoppage.
Yep.
Yeah, very nice end to a fight there.
And then we had Ed Herman versus Khariz Ibragimov, which was...
I think, like understandably, especially because, like, for me, live, I only saw this fight and the main event, which is the perfect way to view this card, in my opinion. But to me, this fight was hysterical. I loved it. Like, Ibragimov had, like, it was his last fight, right? That he just, like, completely exhausted himself after going insane in round one. And he just did it again, even harder. But against, like, one of the craftiest, literally oldest dudes in the division in Ed Herman. I thought it was a really smart showing from Ed Herman. He kept his jab out there. He was doing attritional damage basically from the jump. Like, that was the key thing of this fight. Anytime they were in the clinch, anytime they were at range, he was thinking of ways that he could encourage Ibragimov to slow down. And Ibragimov was just like wholeheartedly inviting him to do that stuff more and more successfully. And the highlight of it was at a point where he either had an underhook or an overhook. And without like controlling the wrist, without like off balancing him first, he just tried to full on muscle Ed Herman off his feet with a hip throw and made a sound that I can only describe as something like that. Was that about right? A huge bellow of effort. And Ed Herman's heels didn't even come off the canvas. He no-sold that shit so hard. I was thinking about it all day and giggling to myself. So, future depressed this fight there for me, for sure. But, I like seeing Ed Herman get old crafty man wins. So good for him.
Yep. All due respect to the bloody slow nine.
Yeah. And then, yeah, Ed Nine Fingers, as I keep calling him on the Vivi. And we're out of time pretty much. So I just want to very quickly say, I thought that Anthony Rocco's Martin Life was in for a nightmarish matchup against Ramzan Emaev. And all it took to turn that into a very winnable matchup and force Emaev to make some strange and poor decisions was finally shoring up that defensive wrestling. Rocco Martin's takedown defense looked super tight. And without that, Emaev just kind of turned into, it was like watching Jared Gordon not able to get a takedown. He just kind of turned into a much sloppier version of himself when he was forced to only pressure strike. So, yeah, sometimes you neutralize one threat in someone's game, and it turns out everything is so interconnected, the rest of the game kind of falls apart. And Tony Martin has built a game for himself that has like so few moving pieces. It's kind of like fighting Tyron Woodley. Like, there's a definite approach to get there to beat him, but it's surprisingly difficult to toe that line. So, hell yeah, Anthony Martin. Love the progression. That's our episode.
I will say it is super weird how Anthony Martin has changed from being a clinch wrestling Kimura guy,
power submission artist,
to being a counter right hand and calf kick guy who also goes for Kimuras whenever you take him down.
But it's great. It's such a turn.
It's working.
Yeah. Okay. So that's our show. We'll be looking forward to next week's card. I am genuinely quite interested in seeing Jacare versus Blachowicz. And then, as I said at the start of the show, we get a blessed 2 weekends off after that. November 16th is that date, and then the next fight card is until December 7th. So we get 3 weekends off. Look forward, as we already are, to some fun topics. If you have any suggestions or ideas you want us to hit upon, things that we can afford to dive into a little deeper that aren't just tied to the schedule, let us know. And you can do that pretty easily by finding us on social media. Phil is on Twitter as @EvilGregJackson. And you can find me at Boxing Bush with a BUSCH. And shit, that's about it. Anything else? Anything coming out for you this week, Phil?
Just a preview.
Yeah.
So we're going to be looking at Blachowicz versus Souza.
As for me, I think I've spent so long on this show, like trying to encourage myself to actually finish something by saying it's going to be coming out, that I've now just poisoned it as any kind of vehicle to
as a motivation mechanism. Yeah,
right. So I think what I'm going to do is not mention articles until I've already written them. Like currently, I'm working on a Zabit Cater breakdown. That's a little bit of like a meta-analysis of how much MMA incentivizes people to push forward and throw more. But until it comes out, do not look for it on bloodyelbow.com. Instead, you should look for Phil's preview with Dave Castillo. And until next week, thank you all so much for listening. Find us on that social media. Sign up for the Patreon. There will be a boxing commentary vid coming very soon. There's already been, I think, 2 bonus episodes posted this month or within the last 2 weeks that were recaps of some of the more recent events. So we've been keeping up with it. We hope you guys will join us over there for just $3 a month. You can get access to all that stuff. And until next week, if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands. Maybe we should sit down at the start of each month.
Shit, we didn't even mention KSI Logan Paul.
Well, fuck it.